Hello, welcome to the Artist Scientist Podcast, where we discuss the overlaps of music and technology creation. I'm your host, Alexis Douglas, a music technology enthusiast. Our recording is on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations on Turtle Island, also known as Vancouver, Canada. Today, the Artist Scientist is an internationally acclaimed, award-winning composer, producer, and DJ specializing in mashups, summer jams, and feel-good tracks unearthed from dance music's basement. This artist is also a musicologist who loves to nerd out about electronic music history, which is available through their website. The link is in the comments. Without further ado, it is my immense pleasure to welcome DJ Dain, a.k.a. Andrew Bowers, to the Artist Scientist Podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm really grateful to be here.
So we'll just get right into it. In the article about finding your voice at a Valkyries event, for our listeners, may you please share some tips that helped you to find your voice?
Yeah, I guess to provide some context about that event, Valkyrie Western martial arts specializes in fencing, but they also are interdisciplinary with boxing and wrestling. And they were hosting an event at a convention where there was a game show where they were incorporating some of those things. And they asked me to be a kind of MC or ringside announcer. And I don't really seek out public speaking opportunities on a good day. So I was really taken aback by being offered the opportunity. And I really wasn't sure, was I a good fit for this? It was something I considered way outside my comfort zone. But my friends clearly saw something in me that I could fulfill that role for them. So I put on a motorcycle jacket and Ray-Bans and tried on like my best Michael Buffer impersonation and really just hammed up the role. And it turned out to be like a really fun event, just calling out like for, introducing, fighter A against fighter B, that kind of thing. So more to your question about finding my voice and all of that, I could see it being 3 points or pillars to that experience. First is finding a way to address imposter syndrome. That's something I know I struggle with. I know a lot of friends and artists also struggle with. And it's different for everyone on what's easiest to address that. And it really comes down to that taking reassurance from multiple friends that this was something they thought I could do. And that validation that I was competent at something was really the starting point to having any kind of confidence in that skill. So if nothing else, like believe in your friends who believe in you. It can be an accessible starting point to that kind of thing. The other key thing for me especially was making it silly. I'm the kind of person who will go above and beyond in terms of, effort and production value. If it's something that I think will take a joke and push it even further, that's just my perfect blend. It's the most accessible form of the kind of the yes and philosophy from like improv culture and stuff. Like, I guess I could say like. You can give yourself a kind of permission and so much more creative freedom when you choose to play a character or you give yourself a persona, that you just release yourself from all of that like judgment from other people, because it's like, oh well, that's not me anymore. That's just this
stage persona.
Exactly. That can be so liberating. Yeah. And so it gave me new insight to like so many other artists and performers who they put on a mask, or their stage character is so much different once they're off stage and back at the hotel room. It's just, oh no, I'm just a normal person.
Yeah.
And I guess the third and final point is trust that you have great taste, and that's pulling from an interview Ira Glass did. If you Google Ira Glass The Gap, it's one of my favorite like inspirational pieces of content when it comes to being creative, where he talks about that distance between your taste and your skill. And when you feel like, when you recognize how much you have before you can achieve the same level of skill as what you admire, so many people give up before they get to that point. Like it's the first big hill you have to climb as a creative. And it takes most of us a really long time to climb that hill. But in digging into that, I realized once you're able to cross over, that's arguably where you make some of your best work. But then it changes, because then you get the inverse, where your skill surpasses your taste for a bit. And so at some point, you can potentially become uninspired again, where it's like, oh, I just don't know what I want to make anymore. I've grown tired of making whatever I've been making for a period of time. And so you then have to start the process over, because you'll seek out new artists. You keep consuming, because you obviously love whatever your medium is. You love music, you love visual art, whatever. And you'll see people still further ahead of you in whatever your field is, and go, oh gosh, like, man, I wish I could make that. And so it just starts the whole thing over again. And that can seem really defeating, but I think once you have that understanding of that process, that becomes like a super liberating moment to go from just complete. It's kind of the opposite of imposter syndrome at that point, because you have this better understanding of your relationship to art and how the growth works.
All right. Here's question number 2. Have you ever experienced the flow state? And may you please share a short story of a memorable experience in the flow state, or advise our listeners about how to enter it?
Yeah, it's definitely something I've experienced. And as a creative person, that is the high I'm still continuing to chase as I continue to work. It's once you've experienced it and you recognize it, suddenly it's like, oh, I want that all the time.
Right?
It is very much like a drug or something. It does feel quite addictive. I guess early on in discovering that, it was hard to be aware in the moment that it was happening. It was something that it was much more likely I would look at the clock and wonder, where did the last 4 hours go, and why am I weak with hunger because I just forgot to eat. You just are just completely, in the zone. It feels a bit campy to say it that way, but it is quite accurate. And I would argue it's a kind of, for me at least, like a snowball effect of following your intuition. So in DJing specifically, it's that you're trusting that what the right record is for this moment right now, and then before you know it, each track you play subsequent, as you're kind of like in that very, I would kind of relate it to what like Buddhists describe as being present and in the now. As you're putting on the next record, ideally, this is a state where the record you pick, it couldn't possibly be any other record. It had to be this record. And you just know that from all your, combined previous experiences of, playing with this music and reading crowds and, all these subconscious processes in your mind, just, all coming together at once. I've definitely heard people talk about this in relation to like, when you first start learning how to drive, a lot of anxiety first sets in because there's so many literal moving parts that you're trying to account for, as well as everything else everyone else is doing. And it can be a real information overload. But once you get comfortable, the vehicle, or even a bicycle, it might be another good example, becomes an extension of yourself. And you're not thinking consciously, you're just kind of doing it, and you can feel things out. When the road underneath you goes from asphalt to gravel, that, oh, I had to, turn or shift down, gear down, or whatever you need to do to maintain control. It's not okay, I have to do A, then I have to do B, then I have to do C, which is how it really feels starting out when you're still learning a lot of stuff. So as far as trying to enter that space, I see it as two things to really consider. It's not just about finding ways to step on the gas and accelerate yourself into that process, because you can, it's pretty easy to surround yourself with like inspiring material. You can listen to great music, or go to a gallery or talk to friends and get really hyped and excited. And inspiration is very accessible in a lot of ways, but recognizing where you might have breaks and where you need to take off breaks is a lot more of the work and long-term work that's involved with that. So you can be inspired till the cows come home, but when you go to sit down and you can't quite get past a situation where, like, oh, you're at your day job and a really crummy customer just threw you off, and that memory just intrudes on the moment. Those are the things that can really prevent even getting started entering in a flow state. So I could see, and now of course this is so subjective, people have to figure out what works for them, but either learning to leave those kinds of things at the door, which is very different from abandoning them. Like whatever you're dealing with, like, you don't bury it, you don't shun it away, because that's only toxic for your own mental health. You got to be able to pick that up at appropriate time later. So either being able to separate it when you go to do creative work, or taking the time to make and hold space for it in your creative work. So maybe that's setting aside time during some time in your studio to take those feelings and put them into the canvas or into the music solo or as words on paper, whatever you do. Getting it out of your system is a good self-therapy, frankly, in my opinion. But I think also gets those gears turning. It starts that process of release, and you start to trust yourself to express something, and that can move one thing into the next to lead you into that flow state, so to speak.
Yeah, there was so many nuggets right there. Like, trick bombs, holy place. Let's put this down. Like, man, I want to go do all the art right now. It's like, take a pause, like, slow down, just do some stuff.
And that feeling too of like, I just want to go and art, like a verb, is a great feeling. And sometimes it could be like a little bit anxiety inducing, of like, I guess because it's also a form of excitement at the same time. Because like, I want to do something, but where do I put it? Like, where do I do I do the music? Do I do the art? Like, if you like playing with multiple mediums, it's a blessing and a curse at the same time.
All right. Last question. From your perspective, where do you see the future of music going in regards to the evolution of technology and music?
This is a really interesting question, given what's been happening like right now in the last few months. And personally, I think we do need to be very mindful right now. Something that I recently had to come to terms with is that, and I'm kind of borrowing a bit of a quote from someone here. I'm blanking on, I should have written down who I got this from, but I've realized that I'm also not immune to the emotional appeal of speculation. And that's coming from what's happening right now with non-fungible tokens, NFTs being the hot thing for like crypto art, and for, we're seeing musicians and producers also getting in on this technology. There's a lot of massive hype around it. And when I first heard about it, I thought, oh, this is interesting. I like to see how this technology is being used. And, a lot of the surface level stuff I was reading was quite interesting. And I'm definitely someone who is all for, disruption of current systems, especially if it's, creating more liberation for artists to not be, bogged down by, a lot of the limits of the old systems we've been used to. Like, the music industry has not had the best track record, to put it lightly, for many people. So there's lots of ideas and potential around things like blockchain technologies being thrown around. But so many of us as artists, especially now during a pandemic, we're really vulnerable, and a lot of us are desperate for like any kind of system we can believe in, that we can just, if I can just focus all my efforts into this, then everything's going to be okay. And I'm really worried about people getting burned and taken advantage of in that way, because, that's an unfortunate history of different systems of power doing that to creative people. So, that all said, I'm cautiously optimistic. I think that, as long as there's disruption happening, there's also a bigger conversation happening at the same time. And for me, with any of these new technologies, they're only truly valuable to me if they're supporting like the most vulnerable people in our communities. When I remember when VR was like kicking off as a thing, I was all for it. And I remember talking to some people who talked about like, oh, well, like, what's the price point? Like, what's the accessibility of this tech? And that really made me stop and think like, oh, right. Like, I can probably afford to get into this and, start doing 3D art and all sorts of stuff. But I know so many other cool creative people who are in a much more, different economic bracket than I am, who are, I would argue, much more talented than I am in certain fields. And, they don't necessarily have the same access that I would. And so that really got me thinking about maintaining that kind of critical thought as we develop things. So I think overall, I'm still encouraged that, I'm seeing these conversations happening more openly than ever before. And maybe partly that's because of with the advent of like, social media algorithms, I'm just seeing more of these conversations because I'm looking for them. But, prior to all this, I wasn't hearing that same, fervor and challenge of like, oh, we need to be thinking about these things, like who's left behind, like what's, what are we missing or not talking about when we talk about these new exciting ideas. And the fact that that's becoming more common, that conversation is being raised up and those voices are being heard more, that gives me a lot of hope.
All right. So to summarize the podcast so far, we have tips about finding your voice, how to enter the flow state, and what's coming up possibly in music technology with the arrival of the NFT train. To conclude the podcast, can you please tell us about one of your projects that you're excited about?
Yeah, the latest thing I'm working on is a music curation series. Right now it's called You Should Be Listening. And I've been posting these videos on my TikTok and Instagram accounts, and they're just 60 seconds where I discuss a song I love. Maybe it's, specifics about why I love it, maybe how I discovered it, or just other facts I found interesting during my research. But all in all, it's songs that like I think you should be listening to.
Thank you so much, Andrew Bowers, a.k.a. DJ Dain, for talking with me on this Artist Scientist podcast. We look forward to all of your future creations. And for our listeners, if you want to check out more about what DJ Dain is up to, you can go to his website, the link below. In closing, may you stay in the flow and keep creating. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity.
If you enjoyed this podcast, hit that like and subscribe button and leave your comments below. Lastly, remember to download the free Midimo mobile iOS app by Flowverse and enjoy a new music production experience using 3D motion.